One night of nothing turned into a lifetime of longing. She said it was casual, but my heart knew otherwise. The evening started like any other, soft golden streetlights painting her suburban street in a warm glow. At 24, his life was still an unfolding map of ambitions and awkward encounters, and yet there was something about the calm authority in her presence that made time slow down whenever he was near her. She was 40, a graceful, confident woman with long black hair that shimmered under the porch light, her dark brown eyes carrying stories he could only guess at. Her lightly tanned skin and subtle freckles framed a face of quiet maturity, a beauty that had grown into itself, with soft laugh lines and a curvy figure moving with elegance and purpose. Tonight had been a small gathering, friends chatting softly, wine glasses catching the light. He had lingered by her side, half out of curiosity, half because he wanted to be near her, feeling the way the room seemed to shift when she laughed, a full, genuine laugh that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. She had noticed his gaze, giving him a fleeting smile, one that lingered just long enough to make him question his own restraint. When the gathering ended, he found himself walking her to the door, the soft thrum of his heartbeat louder than any sound around them. The night was calm, stars barely visible behind a clear, pale sky. Their hands brushed accidentally, a fleeting contact that lingered in his mind far longer than it should have. She leaned slightly closer, a natural, unforced movement, as if the space between them had its own gravity. He wanted to speak, to say something meaningful, but words tangled in his throat. Then, almost without warning, she invited him in. Not explicitly, but the subtle arch of her brow, the way her fingers hovered near the doorframe, implied an intimacy he hadn't anticipated. Inside, the room was softly lit, warm hues wrapping the familiar furniture in comforting familiarity. He could smell the faint scent of vanilla and something uniquely hers, a memory yet to be formed. Conversation flowed easily, laughter filling small corners, yet beneath the surface, he could feel the tension, a quiet, unspoken pull. Their hands touched again, this time with intention, resting briefly on a couch armrest, lingering too long to be casual. Her eyes held his in a gaze that spoke of things neither dared name: desire, curiosity, uncharted territory of heartbeats and restraint. And then it happened. A brush of her hand along his arm, a quiet look that suggested more than words, a warmth that spread through him and stayed. She said it was casual, a moment to enjoy, nothing more, but his chest tightened, heart heavy with the awareness that he had already crossed a line his mind hadn't yet mapped. He left that night with a mixture of elation and dread, the streetlights outside her home casting long shadows that mirrored the conflict within him. He felt the fallout of something he couldn't yet define, the slow, aching pull of wanting more from someone who had promised less. The morning after felt impossibly still. He awoke to the lingering scent of her, warm vanilla with a hint of jasmine, as if the room itself remembered her presence. Every corner of her living room, every chair and table, seemed infused with her essence. She had been there, moving with quiet purpose, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman with long black hair cascading over her shoulders, graceful curves, lightly tanned skin with subtle freckles, and dark brown eyes that had quietly anchored him the night before. She looked effortlessly stunning even in simple clothes, a soft blouse tucked into tailored trousers, her posture exuding calm authority and quiet warmth. He could still feel the faint echo of her hand against his arm as he sipped coffee, heart still fluttering from the brief contact. He tried to recall if she had meant anything by it, but her expression had remained composed, almost unreadable. There had been no words to explain the tension that hummed between them, only the weight of mutual understanding. It was casual, she had said, but her presence had left an imprint he wasn't prepared to ignore. Conversation flowed like a gentle stream, punctuated by shared laughter over trivial things, yet beneath the surface, every glance carried unspoken significance. Her voice was steady, warm, but occasionally softened, as if she herself wrestled with the boundaries she had established. He noticed the slight smile lines at the corners of her eyes, a mark of time and experience, and something in him ached not for her past, but for the gravity of what he could feel now. She moved around the kitchen, preparing breakfast with meticulous care, and he found himself mesmerized by the subtle movements, the way her fingers curled around the coffee mug, the way her long black hair caught the morning light, the faint hum she made as she worked. It wasn't seduction, it was simply life lived gracefully, naturally, and the intimacy of witnessing it stirred something deep within him. He tried to speak, to fill the quiet with words, but found himself watching her instead, cataloging details, the curve of her shoulder, the tilt of her head, the soft laugh lines, the depth in her eyes. And when she looked at him, her gaze lingered longer than necessary, a quiet curiosity, a gentle pull he couldn't name. Her touch remained fleeting yet electric, as if the air between them carried its own charge. By the time breakfast ended, he felt the pull of reality pressing back, the age gap, the unspoken rules, the casual line she had drawn. Yet he couldn't ignore the undeniable thread connecting them, a quiet current that had begun the night before and now hummed beneath every gesture. He wanted to ask questions, to seek permission, but every word he imagined seemed inadequate. As he left her home later that morning, he caught one last glance, her standing by the door, 40 years old, confident yet quietly vulnerable, long black hair falling like a curtain framing her lightly tanned, flawless skin. She waved, a slight smile playing at her lips, and he knew that the fallout of that night wasn't over. Something had shifted. Something fragile and potent had begun to weave itself into their lives, and he didn't yet know if it could be unraveled. Days passed, yet the memory of her lingered like a soft, unrelenting echo. Every time he thought of her, his chest tightened with both longing and hesitation. At 22, the contrast between his youthful uncertainty and her 40-year-old grace was impossible to ignore. She remained vividly present in his mind, long black hair cascading over her shoulders, dark brown eyes full of quiet wisdom, lightly tanned skin, subtle freckles, and a curvy figure that moved with fluid elegance. She had a natural authority, the kind that didn't demand attention but drew it effortlessly. When she called him that evening, it wasn't with the casual tone he had hoped for. Her voice was warm, inviting, yet carried a subtle weight, an unspoken acknowledgement of the previous night. He found himself fumbling for words, his own nervousness betraying him. She suggested meeting at a small local cafe, somewhere bright and public, yet in the early evening light, even the ordinary environment seemed charged with tension. Sitting across from her, he noticed the details that had somehow become crucial, the way her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, the subtle curve of her smile, and the way her eyes studied him, not intrusively, but with an intensity that made him feel exposed and seen at once. She wore a casual but stylish blouse and fitted jeans, her lightly tanned skin glowing under the cafe's warm, late afternoon light. He, in contrast, felt clumsy and youthful, yet that contrast only seemed to heighten the magnetic pull between them. They spoke of inconsequential things, work, books, movies, yet the pauses between words were heavy with unspoken sentiment. Each laugh, each brush of hands against the table, carried more weight than either wanted to admit. He caught himself leaning slightly closer, drawn not just to her beauty, but to the depth of her presence. She noticed, of course, and met his gaze with a subtle knowing that sent a quiet shiver down his spine. At one point, their knees brushed under the table. The touch was fleeting, accidental yet electric. She did not pull away, but her expression softened, a blend of amusement and something else, something unnameable. He realized that this casual connection was anything but. Every glance, every slight touch, seemed to pull him deeper into a world he hadn't anticipated. When the evening ended, the cafe lights dimming into warm glows against the window, he walked her to the door. She paused, hand lightly brushing his arm in farewell. The touch lingered longer than it should have, leaving an impression that seemed to settle in his very bones. As he turned to leave, he felt the quiet, aching awareness that nothing could return to how it had been before. This was no longer a fleeting, inconsequential encounter. Something had awakened in both of them, a tension, a curiosity, a desire for connection that neither dared speak aloud. And yet, with her confident yet gently reserved presence, he sensed that the line between casual and something more was dangerously thin. The following week felt like a tug-of-war between desire and hesitation. He found himself replaying every moment they had shared, analyzing every glance, every lingering smile, every subtle touch. He was young, inexperienced, and yet the way she carried herself, a 40-year-old American Caucasian woman, long black hair, lightly tanned skin, curvy, graceful posture, made him feel both insignificant and completely seen. Her presence demanded attention without demanding anything at all. They met again, this time at her home, in the bright afternoon light that streamed through her windows. She had chosen a simple outfit, a soft pastel blouse and tailored pants that emphasized her elegance without effort. She greeted him with a warm smile, the corners of her dark brown eyes crinkling slightly, and the subtle curve of her lips hinting at private amusement. Conversation flowed easily, laughter soft but genuine. Yet underneath, a current of tension persisted. Every small touch, her hand brushing against his as she passed a cup of tea, the way her knees subtly pressed against his as they sat on the sofa, felt loaded with meaning. He noticed her subtle vulnerabilities, the quick sighs, the way she looked away for just a moment before meeting his gaze again. These glimpses into her humanity made her allure all the more compelling. He wanted to ask questions, to clarify boundaries, but each time words formed, they faltered under the weight of unspoken desires. Instead, they let silence speak, a shared understanding in quiet proximity. When she laughed, a soft, melodic sound, he found himself leaning slightly closer, captivated by both the sound and the warmth radiating from her presence. By the end of the visit, he realized that the emotional stakes were rising. He was no longer simply enjoying her company. He was caught in the gravitational pull of an unspoken connection. Her casual attitude masked the subtle depth of feeling beneath, and he felt a quiet thrill and fear at how easily he could be drawn in. As he left, the sun casting bright, golden light across the suburban street, he knew the next encounter would be decisive. Something was shifting between them, a delicate tension between affection, desire, and restraint. Neither could remain untouched, unchanged. He began noticing small things, the way she tilted her head when listening, the flicker of curiosity in her eyes, the warmth in her smile that seemed reserved just for him. At 22, he had never experienced this combination of admiration and longing, a feeling amplified by her 40-year-old confidence, her long black hair falling perfectly over her lightly tanned skin, her curvy figure, her soft laugh lines and subtle freckles. She exuded maturity, life experience, and an understated magnetism that pulled him into her orbit. One evening, they shared a quiet dinner at her brightly lit kitchen. The space smelled of fresh herbs and warm bread, the sunlight streaming through windows. Her fingers brushed his as they reached for the same glass, lingering just long enough to ignite a quiet thrill. They spoke of past experiences, not in a boastful or confessional way, but in a manner that revealed her depth, the wisdom gained over her 40 years, and his own youth's eager curiosity. Their physical proximity grew more noticeable, subtle touches and glances that neither could deny. His hand occasionally hovered near hers, and she did not shy away. She laughed softly, dark brown eyes glimmering with amusement and perhaps something more. His heart raced with the recognition that every casual boundary was blurring. The evening ended with her walking him to the door. Their hands brushed again, a moment heavy with unspoken tension. He lingered outside, watching her fade into the bright interior, realizing that the fallout of a single night had deepened into something far more potent, desire mixed with hesitation, admiration with emotional vulnerability. The tension between them became a constant companion. He found himself replaying every encounter, analyzing every gesture. He wanted her presence and feared it simultaneously. At 40, she carried herself with a graceful confidence, long black hair shimmering in bright light, lightly tanned skin, dark brown eyes full of life's wisdom. She wore her elegance effortlessly, her clothing simple yet flattering, each movement precise yet fluid. They spent an afternoon together in her sunlit garden. Bright sunlight highlighted the lush greenery as she laughed at a small joke he made. Their knees brushed, fingers lightly touched while passing gardening tools, subtle glances that spoke volumes. Emotional intimacy deepened alongside the playful physicality, and he realized that casual was no longer sufficient. By the end of the day, sitting on a bright porch swing, their shoulders nearly touching, he sensed a mutual acknowledgement. Neither could continue as before. The connection between them had solidified into something real, tender, and fraught with the tension of forbidden attraction. The final part resolved the tension, showing a warm, satisfying emotional closure. He and she sat together on her porch in the evening light. Her long black hair shimmered, lightly tanned skin glowing, dark brown eyes reflecting quiet understanding. They shared gentle laughter, fleeting touches, and soft glances that needed no words. The air was bright, warm, and full of subtle affection. His hand brushed hers deliberately now, not by accident. She leaned lightly toward him, confident yet tender, embodying a graceful 40-year-old beauty with a calm, nurturing presence. The emotional fallout of their initial casual night had matured into a genuine connection, deep and reciprocal. The story closed on this serene, intimate note: mutual recognition of desire, trust, and emotional intimacy, a satisfying resolution to a slow burn, age gap romance that honored both characters' depth and growth.